Hey everyone, it's Joelle here. Today we are going to do a review with spoilers. So if you don't want spoilers, then just go ahead and just don't watch this video. But if you don't care about spoilers, or maybe you've already read this book series, then keep watching. But anyways, so we are going to do a breakdown review of the Magician's Trilogy by Lev Grossman. I have books 1 and 2 in physical copy. I don't have the third book in a physical copy, but I actually listened to the audiobooks. So this is an audiobook trilogy review. So I'm going to just kind of break down each book, what I thought, what I rated it, and yeah, we'll go from there. So book 1... Here we have Quentin Coldwater on the cover. And if you guys don't know, this is actually turned into a television series on Sci-Fi Network. So I'm going to be talking mainly about the books, not the television series, even though I've watched parts of the television series. So this is very, very book focused. I will say that the books in the show are nothing alike at all. Nothing alike. Well, some a bit alike, but totally different spectrum. And as per usual, books better than the show. But anyway, that's beside the point. So let's talk about the Magician. So book 1, we're introduced to Quentin Coldwater, who is this handsome young fella here. Oops, bookmark stuck in there. Looks like I started to read it, and yeah. But anyway, so basically Quentin Coldwater, typical high school teenager kid getting ready to go to his college interviews to try and get accepted to college. But one day he ends up going to his college interview, finds a man dead who was supposed to interview him, and gets this like letter that he starts following. It's blowing through the wind, and he ends up in this back alley, which leads him to this land that's all sunny and happy and everything. And he meets Elliot, and Elliot is a very posh, flamboyant guy who is like, you're late, let's take you to the exam. So he's like, what? So he ends up taking this magic assessment exam and finds out that he gets accepted into this school called Breakbills. And Breakbills is essentially a magic training school, not like Hogwarts. One thing I do love about this series, though, is there's so many references to Harry Potter, and like, it's funny. But anyways, so he gets into Breakbills. We learn a lot about the different kids that are in the story. Now, granted, they're all high school going into college age, whereas in the TV series, they're all already in college and they're going to grad school. So there's one big difference there. But anyways, he meets Alice. Alice is kind of like a quirky, weird, quiet girl who's really, really good at magic. They find out that they're all part of the physical type of magic spectrum, so they're able to do physical things, but there's all these different, like Alice is a light bender, and then like they can all do different things. But anyways, so you kind of learn a little bit about the different characters there. There's Elliot. Janet is another character. Now, Janet, not to be confused, if we're going to the television, she is Margot. They changed her name from the television series because it was too confusing, because there's too many names that start with J. Personally, I don't agree with that, but whatever. So Janet is Margot. But anyway, we're going to call her Janet for the book series. So basically, they're also, like, they kind of have their own story that they grew up with about magic, and it's called... it's like the Fillory and Further series. And Fillory is essentially this land where these like British kids got chosen to go, kind of like Narnia a little bit. So Quentin's always been obsessed with it, and it turns out that Fillory is real. So, but a lot of the first book is them learning about their magic, going to another Breakbills school where they turn into birds and they fly down to Antarctica. And it's also the development of the romance between Alice and Quentin, which is also the same in the show. But what happens in the first book is they find out that they go through school. The older kids graduate first, so Alice and Quentin are kind of left behind, and then post-graduation, they're like, what do we even do with our lives? So they end up tracking down Elliot and Janet and Josh, who's another one of the kids. And turns out, and by the way, they all love drinking. They drink a lot. They're like winos to the T, to the max, to the T, whatever. They like wine. But they end up graduating. They all live in this kind of like loft apartment in New York where they're able to like live with money because they can do magic and shit. But they graduate and then they realize that Fillory is real. They find these magic buttons that take them to Fillory. They get there, cool, and then they have to fight and do this battle. And when they graduated, they were all given these like demons and tattoos on their back. But long story short, there's a battle. Alice ends up dying, but she doesn't really die. She becomes a Niffin, which is like an evil demon thing. So then they all get sad and everything, but they all become kings and queens of Fillory because Fillory is kind of ruled by like human kids, just like Narnia. So very similar to that. And then that leads us into book number 2. Book number 2 is The Magician King, and here we have Julia on the cover. So Julia is Quentin's friend from growing up, and she also got into the Break Bills exam, but she failed and didn't make it, but somehow remembered because the memory charm that worked on her didn't really work. So a lot of this follows Julia's journey and trying to learn about magic, and she becomes something called a hedge witch, which basically she kind of gets like bootleg magic, travels all around the world to all these different like safe houses, and they do all of their spells and everything. So what happens is like the beginning of this story, it has a lot of flashbacks because you're already in it. They're already kings and queens of Fillory and everything, but then we flash back a lot to Julia because Julia is one of the queens, and we're like, Julia, like, where the heck did she come from? And we find out that Julia went through a lot of shit. A lot of depression, just begging Quentin to get her into the school, and he's just like, I'll try, but it doesn't work. She ends up getting involved with this group, and they're trying to essentially raise a goddess. And what happens is, in turn, they end up raising the trickery god, and he ends up raping Julia and taking away her soul, in a way. So Julia's really messed up. She's messed up. They call it her shade. She lost her shade. Which again is similar to the TV series, but way more graphic in the TV series. They're also, same note, so we find out Julia's story, but then we also are following Quentin. Quentin decides he wants to go on a quest, and he's gonna find a boat and build this boat and go on a journey on the sea, and he takes a few people from Fillory with him, and turns out he gets himself kicked out of Fillory for good. He gets kicked out by Ember, who is the god of Fillory, and so he's like trying to get back to Fillory. Julia can't talk. Quentin's trying to get back to Fillory. He runs into Josh and Poppy, and Poppy is another girl that is with Josh. She's an Australian magician chick, and they're trying to get back to Fillory so bad. They go to like research the book, find like the author's house. They find like the kids that the books are based on house, and they end up getting back there. But it's weird because they find this random kid, because usually like kids are supposed to go to Fillory. It's like it's a kid world, Narnia essentially, and the kid ends up not going, but they end up going back, and they get stuck there, and that's how Quentin gets banned. And at the end, Julia becomes a god. It's weird. Julia's always one of those characters that I'm like, I don't like her, and I don't like her in the show either. The character is just kind of like meh. So Quentin is banned and banished. Meanwhile, Elliot and Janet are kind of ruling Fillory. Elliot is the High King, so he's in charge, and he's very like high and mighty, and I don't really like Elliot when he's the king. Josh and Poppy are there too, and they end up taking the place of Julia and Quentin. And that leads us to book number 3. we start off book number 3, which I don't have a physical copy of, but book number 3 essentially is Quentin is in his 30s now, and he is kind of like lost in the world and decides to go on this like quest to get money because he needs money to, he's trying to save Alice. That's essentially it. And I don't know why he needed money. I can't remember. But he ends up running into this girl named Plum, who he knows, but we don't really know anything until we flash back. It turns out when Quentin got banished from Fillory, he went back to Breakbills and they made him a professor, which is kind of cool. I actually like that storyline. I wish they would have done more with that. But he ends up becoming a professor, and his whole thing is he's trying to figure out how to get Alice back. He knows she's a Niffin, but he wants to figure out how to get to her and how to turn her back. So Plum ends up being one of the students of his, and they kind of like run into a situation together, and she ends up getting expelled. And the situation they run into is they see Alice. So then it becomes his mission to try and get to her and save her. Also, in the land of Fillory, Fillory is dying. Magic is being depleted, and they're trying to figure out how to save Fillory. Janet's kind of taken over control because Elliot's going back to get Quentin to get his help, even though Quentin can't come back. They end up going on this weird quest to find this briefcase, and it turns out inside the briefcase is a spell and a knife. And essentially what the spell is how to create a magical world, a magical land. And Quentin decides he's going to learn how to do that, and Poppy's going to help him. And they kind of learn everything on how to create a land. And when they do that, they end up finding a doorway to Alice, and he's trying to get to her and save her. Elliot comes back and is like, hey, Quentin, we need you. We need to save Fillory. They end up getting Alice out. She's fine. She's kind of a bitch, but then she ends up getting back to her normal Alice self. They get back to Fillory. Everything is good. They save Fillory. Janet is there, and she ended up becoming a badass while Elliot was gone because she had to learn how to fight and save things. And yeah, and then Josh and Poppy are there, and Poppy's pregnant, and Josh is with Poppy, even though Quentin slept with Poppy in the second book, but it was like a one-time thing. They saved Fillory, and then Quentin ended up creating a magical world, and him and Alice live in there, but it turns out that the magical world actually links to Fillory. And Julia kind of saved everything, too, with being a goddess, so, and then it just kind of ends. So overall, I think I gave all 3 of them a 4, but I think the one that I liked the most was, I liked parts of the third one a lot because I loved the story of Quentin being a teacher. I liked parts of the second one because even though I didn't like Julia a lot, I thought it was interesting, the whole hedge witch magic system thing. And then also I liked Quentin going on the quest with the boat. So yeah, but anyways, let me know if you guys have listened to these books or read these books. Give me your feedback in the comments. As always, check out all my social media links in the description box, and yeah, I'll see you guys all in the next one. Okay, bye.